Well, thanks very much, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're here today because we've got serious concerns about both H.R. 8 and H.R. 1112, two of the bills that the Democrats are putting on the floor of the House. They're bills that they're putting on the floor under the guise of saying that they're going to address issues related to gun violence. Neither one of these bills would have done anything to stop some of the tragedies that we've seen. But what they would do is very clearly prevent law-abiding citizens from having access to firearms. And what these bills would do, frankly, is create a situation where the exchange of weapons, being able to lend your weapon, private firearm sales, would not be allowed. And then you would see this as the first step towards the creation of some sort of a federal gun registry. Even though the bill says they won't be doing that, we would see, as these bills, if they were to pass and become law, a situation where they couldn't be enforced ultimately without a federal gun registry. We believe it's very important that we do everything possible to keep weapons away from criminals, to make sure that the laws are enforced, but we won't be part of something that prevents law-abiding citizens from having access to firearms, from having access to weapons they need to protect themselves. And we have with us here today a number of American citizens who've been the victim of violent crimes and for whom access to a firearm and restrictions on access to firearms are the kinds of things that clearly have put them in danger, and we do not want to be party to something that's going to leave people unable to protect themselves. A number of my colleagues are here today to speak, as well as a number of citizens. And so I'd like to begin by turning things over to Shayna Lopez-Rivas, who's going to tell you her story and why we think it's so important for women in particular to be able to have access to weapons to protect themselves. Shayna.
Thank you. I'm astonished how a few moments from one night could completely change a person's life. For me, that night occurred back in 2014. That morning, a man raped me in a parking garage on campus. I had pepper spray, but he had a knife, and I knew my fight was over the moment he pulled it out. After that vicious attack, I promised myself I would never, ever be a victim again. In keeping my promise, I delved into learning about self-defense and spent thousands of hours training. I have learned a firearm is the best tool personally for self-defense. Had I been armed that night that stole so much from me, I am confident things would have been different. Those who support this bill claim it's about safety. However, this bill is not about safety at all. H.R. 8 will not stop criminals from stealing firearms, getting them on the black market, or buying them through straw purchases. This bill will only make it more difficult and expensive for law-abiding citizens like myself to own firearms. It discourages use of firearms in defensive situations and encourages prosecution of otherwise lawful gun owners who make an innocent mistake. It also would make it harder for me to lend a firearm to a friend who otherwise couldn't afford one, but needs one for temporary self-defense or to practice at the range by themselves. This bill will not stop crime, but it will make criminals out of normal citizens. As a rape survivor, I understand wanting to make our communities and country safer. I just also understand that passing more laws that are near unenforceable and criminalizing normal behavior of lawful gun owners is not the way to do it. Thank you. I believe Mark Robinson is speaking next.
My name is Mark Keith Robinson. April 3rd of last year, I had the opportunity to speak to my city council in Greensboro, North Carolina concerning my gun rights. They were doing much the same as what some of the members of this Congress are trying to do now. They are trying to infringe on my constitutional right to own a firearm. And I'm here today to say to them the same thing that I said to that city council. I do not intend to let it pass without me speaking up. I am absolutely tired, as most law-abiding gun owners are, of having our rights doled out to us and taken away from us in small parcels. It is high time that our rights are as protected as the criminals' rights. Why is it that the criminals don't have to go to the sheriff and ask for permission to defend themselves in court for the crimes they've committed, but I have to go to the sheriff or the FBI to ask for the right to defend myself from criminals. It's absolutely egregious. Our Constitution gives us an absolute right to defend ourselves with firearms, and it should be uninfringed. So I'm here today to stand up against H.R. 8 and H.R. 1112 because they're doing exactly what the gun owners in this country have been saying for years, taking our rights away from us one small parcel at a time, and it needs to stop. So to the politicians that are here today that are fighting against these bills, I say thank you, and I challenge you to continue to fight against these laws. But to the politicians who support these laws, from those who are the hardcore socialists who plan on trying to dismantle our Constitution, to simply the lazy, ineffective politicians that are holding our rights as political hostage for expedience to advance their own careers, I say this. Gun owners in this country, law-abiding citizens in this country, we're no longer going to be silent. We're no longer asleep. We are wide awake. We are wide aware. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that if you're trying to take our constitutional rights, we are going to get you out of these halls and replace you with people that will. Thank you.
And now we'd like to have Mia Anstine, please.
Hello, my name is Mia Anstine, and I am from Southwest Colorado. By way of background, I grew up in a small house along a dirt road beside the San Juan River. My father taught me firearm safety, and he also hunted to put food on our table. Americans today many of them are not as privileged to have the opportunity to hunt or shoot recreationally as I had. Before my family moved to that area in Colorado, my great-grandfather used to visit with my grandma and my great-uncles to take them hunting. He taught them to hunt, they taught my dad to hunt, and he taught me to hunt. Now I teach others. I also help with youth shooting leagues, competition shootings. Some of the competitors, if they don't have firearms, if their families don't own guns, or maybe they don't have a particular gun for a competition, they may have to borrow one. And it really is a joy to watch a young boy or a young girl win a competition with my break-action shotgun. It's also a real joy to watch a disabled veteran borrow my shotgun to go tag a wild turkey. This H.R. 8 bill would criminalize both of those activities and many more. Colorado is one of a handful of states that already have these supposed universal background checks. And evidence has shown that they do nothing to reduce crime. A study by gun control researchers has looked into these laws, and they found that they have little effective measure. They don't really work. In Washington state, they also, after having their laws implemented for 2 years, only prosecuted one crime. So they really aren't effective at all, and people aren't enforcing them. We don't need more ineffective, unnecessary, and intrusive laws. What we need is for Congress to take a look at and focus on the causes of violent crime. They need to deal with these, and instead of pushing laws on innocent citizens like myself, they need to look at rules that will save us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. Now I'd like to have Anthony join us.
Hello, my name is Anthony Calandro. I own a gun range and a training facility in New Jersey. My business is a place where families, neighbors, professional athletes, and celebrities come to learn how to safely and responsibly use firearms. Now, I can tell you, it's not easy being a gun owner in the state of New Jersey. And if Nancy Pelosi gets her wish and the Bipartisan Background Checks Act becomes law, it won't make things any easier for me, especially for us that actually follow the law. What makes it worse is that they know that universal background checks don't work. They haven't worked in California. they haven't worked in Colorado, and they haven't worked in Washington State. That's because nothing in this bill will do anything to stop criminals from acting like criminals. Instead, it treats us, the law-abiding citizens, like the bad guys. And quite frankly, I'm tired of it. I filled out piles of forms and passed dozens of background checks, but apparently that's not enough. It's time to stop treating good, honest people like criminals just because we made the choice to defend ourselves and our families. Congress needs to stop passing unconstitutional laws and leave the burden on the courts to sort it out. They need to do their job. The system is broken. So thank you all for inviting me here to speak today, and everyone who believes in a Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the United States of America, please contact your representatives and tell them to oppose H.R. 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Next, Jennifer, please join us.
Hello. My name's Jennifer Chrisman. I'm from an extremely small town in Indiana. The name of the town is Rosedale. My graduating class was of only 64 students, and that was with us graduating. All but 2 graduated, so that's how big my high school was. I'm a mom. I have 2 twin boys. They're 6 years old. I've been teaching them gun safety. I'm also a firearms instructor. I grew up shooting guns all my life. I started shooting guns as 7 years old. My grandfather took me, my dad took me, my uncle took me. We all went and we went to spot shoots. We brought home turkeys when we'd win. It was a family tradition that I wanted to keep up with my boys. I work at a school. I'm a teacher's aide. A lot of the teachers that I work with want to carry firearms. Being an instructor, they come to me all the time asking, well, what do I recommend for them to carry? What's comfortable, what shoots well? And I can't tell them. It has to be their pick. So I would likely be willing to let them borrow one of my handguns. I know they're not going to commit a crime. I know these are all good people. The majority of them go hunting, so I know that they have passed the initial background check to get their guns. But now if I was to let them borrow my pistols with this H.R. 8 Act, I would become a criminal. They would become a criminal. And we're all good people. We're just small town people who grew up around guns. This is just our way of life. With this new background check law, if we were to do things that we do every day as responsible gun owners, and if I was to let my stepfather take my grandsons and borrow a gun to go, this would all be illegal now. I could go to prison for a year. Passing this bill doesn't affect criminals. They don't do background checks. Criminals commit crimes. That's what they do. They're not going to follow all these laws. I'm sure you can tell that I'm pretty nervous up here. I don't public speak, but I was always taught to speak my mind and say what's right, and I feel this is right. I don't feel that the H.R. 8 bipartisan background check law is right. It's just going to make criminals out of innocent people like me and all of my friends. So I ask that you please do not pass the H.R. 8 bipartisan background check. That's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Doug Collins from the 9th District of Georgia. I'm the ranking member on the Judiciary Committee. What we've seen here just for the last few minutes is the face of responsible gun ownership. You've seen exactly, though, who this bill actually targets, contrary to what my friends across the aisle have said that their bill is supposed to do. Frankly, H.R. 8 is taking the fears and the concerns of a nation over gun violence and perpetrating a fraud upon them. They're preying upon the very victims that they're wanting to supposedly help by putting a bill out there that will not help them. By constantly bringing up the mass violence incidents such as schools and theaters and others, they're saying this will help. The reality is nothing in this bill would have stopped Parkland. Nothing in this bill would have stopped any of the other violence that we have seen coming forward. The problem with this bill is, and now they've just exposed it for themselves, is the Obama administration's Department of Justice said if you're going to at least try universal background checks, you have to have a registry. The Gabby Giffords Foundation, who had a witness at our hearing just a couple of weeks ago, on their websites all over said you've got to have a registry, otherwise you can't do it. In fact, when asked about it, They said that is what we would like to see, and ask how this would actually work in practice, could not answer the question. So my question to you is how many times are the Democrats going to bring a bill up pretending to help people when actually knowing full well that they are lying to the very ones they're trying to help? It also makes it unaffordable for those in rural areas and other places because there's no cap on what someone could charge. And in areas where there's no federally licensed firearms dealers, these are problems. So we can pretend with a charade for the next 48 hours saying this will help you, and it will not. Or we can actually take a look at what actually caused this. All the crimes that they will speak of are already, notice what I said, crimes. We have got to do more prosecutions. In the city of Chicago back, I believe, just a few years ago, they had 25 prosecutions for gun crimes. In a year after, they had over 500 murders. When you look at it from that perspective, it's time we actually do something. That's why myself and many others have introduced the Mass Violence Prevention Act, which actually looks at things that would have stopped Parkland by giving us a way to have reported and actually have something followed up on. Actually increasing crimes when they steal from federally licensed firearms dealers to make it unattractive for them to do so. And then also continuing this process of adding more people to actually prosecute the crimes that are already on the books. I asked the media here, how many times have you heard it? Here's the solution you're looking for, and it ends up being just another bumper sticker, another broken promise. Add H.R. 8 and add H.R. 1112 to another line of fraud perpetrated by the Democrats on the very ones they claim to help. Thank you. Oh, and with that, the gentleman from Tennessee, Dr. Phil Rowe.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. Thanks very much. I'm here not only as a congressman, but as a veteran of the United States Army to fight for the rights of the brave men and women that protected and risked their lives for all of our rights. This bill would strip away Second Amendment rights for our nation's veterans, the men and women who risked their lives for this and all of our other constitutional rights. It's outrageous that we would take away from them, the veterans, their rights without a hearing in a courtroom. Even a criminal must be convicted in a court of law before their names are added to the nixus list. That's called due process. H.R. 1112's language is ambiguous, vague, and about who would be considered adjudicated with a mental illness, severe developmental disability, or severe emotional inability. It's unclear to me and others if that term means veterans with PTSD, or perhaps veterans with depression, or even a veteran that might seek a benefit for anxiety. Over 1.6 million of our veterans have service-connected adjudications by VA for mental illness, including almost 1 million for PTSD alone, which would mean a lot of veterans could be impacted by this legislation. If this bill were to become law, many veterans, I fear, as a physician, would be afraid to seek benefits and treatment out of fear that they would lose their rights. In a time when we're working tirelessly to reduce veteran suicides, passing a law that would discourage veterans from seeking care would be foolish and disastrous. All of the Americans who deserve their constitutional rights, and the most deserving are those who fought for this country and protected those rights. We as veterans oppose H.R. 1112. Now I'd like to turn the podium over to Richard Hudson, I think.
Thank you. Okay. My name is Richard Hudson. I work for the people of the 8th District of North Carolina. You know, Nancy Pelosi's framed this debate as one between those who care and want to do something about gun violence and those who don't care. That's an unfortunate choice. That's a cynical choice. And indeed, it's factually not true. I believe Democrats care just as much as Republicans do about this scourge of gun violence. We all want to do something to end it. And in fact, if you look at the record, House Republicans have a strong record of doing something. In the last 2 Congresses, we passed 21st Century Cures, which have mental health reforms, which included improving the National Violent Death Reporting System at CDC so we can track these violent deaths to look for commonalities so we can find solutions. We permanently authorized Valor grants that allow law enforcement to train active shooter scenarios. We allow more compassionate communication under HIPAA. We provide increased grant funding for training teachers and EMS so we can identify students in crisis before they reach a breaking point. We've reauthorized programs that help focus on treating children early with emotional distress. These are all things in 21st Century Cures. Just last Congress, we passed the Fix NICS, which directly addressed the tragedy of Sutherland Springs, Texas. We also, in the House, dealt with bump stocks. We also passed the Stop School Violence Act, H.R. 4909, which establishes grant programs for schools to do security improvements. Also, to, again, deal with this mental health issue. House Republicans have a strong record of actually doing something that matters. But Nancy Pelosi says it's not good enough because you have to judge us based on our intentions. But let's look at what H.R. 8 would do. It would not have stopped Columbine. It would not have stopped the Virginia Tech shooting. It would not have stopped the Gabby Gifford shooting. It would not have stopped Sandy Hook. It would not have stopped the Navy Yard shooting. It would not have stopped the Charleston Church shooting. H.R. 8 would not have stopped the nightclub shootings at the Pulse nightclub. It would not have stopped the San Bernardino shooting. It would not have stopped Sutherland Springs. H.R. 8 would not have stopped the Parkland shooting. This legislation is ineffective. Nancy Pelosi wants you to judge her on her intentions. I say let's look at outcomes. I call on the Democrats to work together with the Republicans to build on the accomplishments we've already made. Let's end gun violence once and for all. And let's do it together because the American people are counting on us. Thank you. And with that, I want to introduce someone who's been a tremendous leader on the Second Amendment, someone who's led the way for the House, our whip, Mr. Steve Scalise.
Thank you, Richard. I want to thank everybody here who's standing up in support of the Second Amendment, but specifically standing against these two gun control bills that Nancy Pelosi is bringing to the floor this week. And if you look at these bills, they don't have anything to do with background checks. It's about making criminals out of law-abiding citizens. And ultimately, as you've heard story after story from the people standing behind me, every single day, Americans use guns to defend themselves from criminals. That is the heart of what the Second Amendment is about, and it's at the heart of what our founding fathers intended, that all Americans should have the right to use firearms to defend themselves. And over, we see guns used to defend themselves. And yes, in these bills, think about some very specific problems with these bills that Nancy Pelosi doesn't want you to know about. They didn't want me to testify before the Judiciary Committee when Doug Collins tried to have me included in that panel because I wasn't going to spread their message of gun control. In fact, I was going to counter it. And so what I will tell you is right now under this bill, if you've got a neighbor and your neighbor is being beaten up by her boyfriend, she's got a temporary restraining order against her boyfriend, and she's afraid that tonight she's going to come to her house and do her harm, and she asks you to borrow your gun. You can be a felon under this bill for that one simple act of loaning your gun to a friend to defend herself from someone who's going to attack her. You can go to jail for a year. You can be fined $100,000. They say they have exemptions for hunting, and yet the language is so vague that if you went hunting with a friend, you also need to bring your attorney to sit in the deer stand with you and figure out if you hand him your rifle and maybe he wants to go to the range to scope it, you can then go to jail for an act like that. That's what this bill does. This bill turns law-abiding citizens into criminals, and it's one more step towards federalized gun registration and ultimately gun confiscation. That's been the intention of many of the people that are bringing this bill for a long time. They want true gun control, and this is the first step. It's surely not the last. We need to reject these two bad gun control bills. And with that, I think Randy Weber from Texas.
Thank you, Whip. I have probably the distinction of being the only member here who has had a mass gun shooting violence in my district. The Santa Fe shooting happened May 18th last year in a high school about 10 miles south of where my bride and I live. So it's very close and personal. Now, seeing you here, Whip, I remember that June 14th day where you actually experienced that shooting, and I'll never forget it, Dr. Rowe, because my dad was one of the last of the greatest generation who happened to pass away that same day. So it was very, very indelibly put on my memory. And I'm here to talk against this bill. My district is a God-fearing Second Amendment supporting gun-loving community. We understand that guns don't cause crime any more than computers cause pornography. We've experienced that epidemic of what I call social degradation of evil, using firearms as its weapon of choice on that May 18th at Santa Fe High School. On that day, an evil shooter took the lives of 10 people and injured 17 more. And folks, I delivered 10 flags to 10 caskets. And I want to tell you, it was hard. It was heart-wrenching. But I'll tell you this about people in my district. They recognized that guns weren't the problem. It was the person behind the evil that he perpetrated, and they recognized that evil people do evil things. H.R. 8 would not have prevented this horrific, heartbreaking incident from occurring. You've heard that from all of these speakers up here. It doesn't do anything but take away our Second Amendment rights. Evil people do evil things. It's in the societal breakdown that we're witnessing all around us. We in Texas understand that the only thing that stops a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. The bill that's going to be brought to the floor doesn't do anything about that. What I call the societal degradation root of our problem, this type of violence, it only makes it harder for law-abiding citizens to practice our God-given unalienable right to keep and bear arms. So we want to protect our families. We want to protect our communities. We don't want to be guilty of violating any of these laws that H.R. 8 and 1112 would put into place. So we recognize that it's our God-given right to have Second Amendment on our side and keep firearms. We're against this bill, and I just can't say that hard enough. Now, I'm going to turn it over to the guy from Florida, Matt Gaetz. Matt.
Thanks, Randy. My name's Matt Gaetz. I'm a Republican on the Judiciary Committee. The Democrats' anti-Second Amendment legislation is repugnant to the Constitution. It lacks common sense, and it fails to protect vulnerable people. It is not common sense to say that if an illegal alien fails a background check, that we wouldn't notify ICE. But when Republicans offered these common sense changes to the Democrats' legislation, they rejected them because they hate ICE so much that they wouldn't even want ICE to know to remove someone from the country who was trying to buy a gun illegally. That highlights that this isn't really about public safety. It's about the bloodlust that Democrats have to take away guns from law-abiding citizens. Their legislation also fails to protect vulnerable people. If someone has gone to a judge and received a protective order to stop an abuser from coming in their proximity, the Democrats' legislation would stop someone from loaning that person a gun if they were in fear of some sort of violence by an abuser. We're going to stand with the law-abiding Americans. We're going to stand with the Constitution. We're going to stand for common sense reforms like depriving illegal aliens of guns when they try to get them. And ultimately, that'll lead to safer communities and a safer country. And I'd now like to invite my colleague, Ted Budd from North Carolina.
Just want to thank you all for being here. This is such an important issue. Look, we have to decide whether this is about making ourselves feel better or this is about making our communities safer. We all want our kids. I'm a father to 3 teenagers. We all want our kids to come home at the end of the day. We love our children. We love other people's children that are in schools. We want them to be safe. So let's do legislation that actually helps and doesn't impede on our Second Amendment rights for our fellow citizens. And let's keep that in mind, and let's bring our kids home safely with doing the real work that really keeps our kids safe. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kelly Armstrong, Congressman from North Dakota, and I agree with almost everything that has been said. I just would like to point out a couple things from serving on the Judiciary Committee. Things that concern my constituents are how we deal with things in communities and this town, forget about the other part of America and rural America and where we live, where we grow the food, raise the cows that feed and power not only this country but the whole world. And this bill has no exemption for farming or ranching. These families and these farms and ranches often operate 100 miles from the closest community, let alone the closest FFL dealer. And you're dealing with situations where now having a ranch gun in your truck to deal with predator control, putting down a wounded or sick animal becomes a problem if you employ anybody on your ranch. And I would also agree with Congressman Scalise that while there is some language in the bill as far as exemptions for hunting and fishing, they are written in such a way that no law-abiding citizen would ever take the risk of following up. This bill is bad policy, it's terribly written, and it's going to significantly curtail rural America's Second Amendment rights. Thank you.
I'm Congressman Greg Stubbe, Florida 17. This universal background check bill will do absolutely nothing to stop gun violence in America. What it will do is infringe upon the rights of millions of Americans who follow the law every single day and their Second Amendment rights. I hail from Florida, and not a single mass shooting in Florida would this bill prevent. The shooter from Parkland had a background check and purchased a firearm. The shooter in the Pulse nightclub had a background check and purchased a firearm. In my district, just weeks ago, there was a shooter who purchased a firearm, went into a bank building, and murdered 5 people in my district. Those women who were murdered in my district didn't have the opportunity to defend themselves because a corporate policy prohibited them from carrying a firearm in defense of themselves and others. So there's nothing that this bill would do to stop the violence in America. It will only infringe upon the rights of law-abiding citizens, and it's the first step that Democrats are taking to take your guns away. Thank you.
Well, Congresswoman Cheney had to leave, so this will conclude our press conference. Thank you very much. We have another one? Thank you all very much.